It is Monday, which means it's Masterclass Mondays, which means I got another epic lesson for y'all today. And we're going to be talking about the intake process. I get so excited for these days doing these classes. And a lot of the times I'm not really sure if what I'm sharing is translating. So I really want, as I'm going through this process today, if something gives you a realization or there's another level of commitment you're ready to take in your life because of something I said or shared, what I'm really asking and inviting, and this is more of an ask even than an invitation, is that if you have a realization of like, holy cow, I never thought about that, I would love for you to put it down in the comments. What that does is that allows me to see what things translate. It helps me see maybe some other perspectives I could go a little bit deeper into. If you hear something and you're like, oh, I would love to hear more about that, just put what it was and say, I'd love to hear more about that. And just be very specific because I won't necessarily know what you were referring to at that moment. So today is all about the intake process, y'all. This to me is actually the most important part, even more so than integration, and I'll tell you why. The intake process, when done properly, and when I say properly, effectively, when done effectively, you're going to have taken the step that you can control the most, right? You can't control how you integrate necessarily. You can maybe some of the tools. The one part that you have total and complete control on is who you decide to sit with, or as a facilitator, guide, healer, coach, who sits with you. So for me, the intake process is actually the most important part because this is the foundational piece before we even decide to work together or before you decide to work with someone. So what we're going to talk about today is the 4 ins process, which we started talking about intake last week. Intake, intention, in space, integration. This is the 4-part framework we run all of our coaching programs through, that we ran all of our private clients through, all of our retreats through. And it doesn't have to be just in psychedelics. So no matter what kind of container or creation you're making, what's the intake process, the intention setting process, the experience of in space, and the integration process for the people you support or serve. So that's really the intention for this class today, is I'm going to take you through our exact process of intake, which is a 2-part process. So in this 2-part process, we do calls and we do forms, and I'm going to tell you what that looks like. I'm going to tell you how we do that. So if you're already a coach, fantastic, like run with it. When you run people through this type of framework of how do you intake in, what's your intention with them, what's the experience, and then how do you integrate the experience, whether it's running a rehearsal studio like Don Orlando in New York City, or whether you are a shaman facilitator, having an intake process is going to save you a lot of time. Make sure it's the right fit. Make sure that this is someone that you can get the benefit and effects of working together, be very functional. And so we call this the intake process. So the 4 ins process for us, whether it's transformative journeys, whatever, preparation and intentionality are the key to unlocking the potential of master teachers in plant, animal, and fungi form, and also in any other aspect of life. Marriage, relationships, imagine doing an intake process together. Ta and I did, right? And an intention. So we have intake, intention, in space, integration. Today, I'm going to take you deeper into the intake process. So who is today's class for? I mentioned it, but this is who I'm going to be referring to. And of course, you're welcome to be here, even if this isn't you. You're a coach or medicine carrier, and you feel ill-equipped to provide effective post or this is technically pre-journey support. You've never had a personal psychedelic experience, but you want to be armed with the best information when it comes to selecting the right facilitator for you. If you're searching for a comprehensive system and framework to guide you through this intake process, because today we're just covering intake. If you're committed to doing the work, you're not just trying to chase a peak experience or go for one mushroom or one ayahuasca. You're really here because life's not a race. And the only thing you race towards when you race through life is a grave. So that's not a race I'm trying to win, y'all. You know what I'm saying? So, how does this impact who you choose when it comes to the intake process? Well, we talked about this last week. It's going to optimize the effects in choosing someone that's most supportive for you. It's going to help empower your personal growth, and it's going to promote continuous evolution. Now, you maybe are new here. If you're in the Facebook group, you're probably not new here. But my name is Cole Whitty, co founder of the Condor Approach, of the Psychedelic Coach podcast. The reason that we call this the Condor Approach Method is this four ins process: the intake, intention, in space, integration. For us, this is where freedom and flow come from. For us, this is where the evolutionaries, the people who are looking at humanity's horizon, have that bird's eye view. The condor flies the highest in the world. So we have this high level perspective to look at where we've been, honor these ancient and timeless traditions while remembering in evolution that there are going to be parts we cannot bring with us as we see with AI changing, but that doesn't mean we forget. How do we integrate? How do we bridge these ancient technologies and modern and future technologies? You start by the intake process. So you can hear all about me, read all about me, whatever, Google our podcast. What I really want to focus on today is this intake process. I got into this work because of my own health crash. I was 26 years old, sat down sat down on the ground at Disneyland because I literally couldn't take another physical step in my life. Fibromyalgia, endometriosis, 20-something broken bones, immeasurable amounts of imbalances from all those injuries, migraines. My health was such that even when I made that decision in that moment to change my diet and lifestyle, what actually happened was I had to start to track everything too. After losing 50 pounds, after having a lot of my symptoms go away, I had to start learning an intake process on myself. So I'm going to share our intake process, but know that this is an adaptation after seeing so many healthcare practitioners, so many shaman, so many facilitators, so many healers. I started to really see and feel the difference between someone who was really about it and intentional and was looking at the whole picture of my physical health. Because for me, what we teach at the Condor Approach is health is on a continuum from ease to dis-ease. And what you do or don't do moves the dial. And in my moment of desperation, in being in total dis-ease, I was willing to try or do anything. So that's what inspired this approach. That's what got me to pay attention to intake processes. And then I married Ta, who's a registered nurse of 31 years, 23 clinically in New York City emergency rooms, 25 in hospitals. So this is not just us pulling together from our experience as psychedelic facilitators, but our experience, me as a patient, him as a healthcare worker. So when I share these things, know these are not law. When I share these things, know it's not a rule. And I'm going to caution, if you are a coach or healer, to use all the questions that we do, because we have a very high level of trauma education, trauma informed education. And I always say, don't ask a question to a client or someone you're supporting that you are not equipped to handle the answer when it comes to trauma, dramas, and other things. So let's get into it today. The intake process is not just for the facilitator. It starts with the participant seeking the support. So if you're seeking out a coach or guide or shaman, it starts with you. And I touched on this last week, and I want to just touch on it briefly again. There's a difference between expectations versus anticipations. You'll hear often in the psychedelic realms not to have an expectation. But what I've seen happen as a result of that thought being injected into this arena is then people are not asking enough questions as a participant because, oh, well, I don't want to have expectations. So I'll just try not to think about it so that I don't have expectations versus let's illuminate the expectations. Let's communicate what you can anticipate to bring more clarity. We find that brings more safety versus trying to avoid expectations. Let's just acknowledge there are expectations. So an expectation is a rigid assumption about how a psychedelic journey should be. It limits openness and can lead to disappointment or resistance. If you have ever felt disappointed, you had expectation. Whether it was someone bought you the wrong cake for your birthday, whether it was you went into a journey and you didn't have any experience, or you didn't get what you wanted, or you didn't have that God experience, you had an expectation. More times than I could count, people say, I don't have an expectation, and then they have disappointment. But I really think it's they were avoiding looking for where the expectations lie. When we know what the expectations are, we can work with them, which takes me to anticipations. The intake process allows us to separate your expectations from your anticipations and speak to them separately. When you have an anticipation, it's still open-minded and flexible. We can have curiosity and readiness for the journey. So knowing what to anticipate in your journey can support safety. Choosing the right coach or facilitator is pivotal towards your transformation. And that's why I say integration is important. I would say intake is the first decision you make in how you do an intake on yourself, and then who you decide to choose does an intake, how you feel about their intake process. There's not a right or wrong way. I know what supports safety in me. And so I sought facilitators who operated in that type of intake process. So I'm going to show you now what we did in our intake process. We still do, but this was the exact intake process we used for retreats, for private clients. This is what I teach all of the Condor coaches, is how to actually run an intake process. Now I'm going to have to switch screens here for a moment so you get to stare at my beautiful face for a moment. Why is this not exiting? The interesting thing with the intake process is it does take extra time on the front end. I will tell you, the time spent on the front end will save you an exponential amount of time on the back end when you don't have to, you don't have surprises. And I find that when you can actually give people more to look at in the integration or in the intake process, they feel a whole lot safer. All right, here we go. So I'm going to show you this. This is a breakdown. It's actually something that I give our coaches in their intake process for their clients. We do in an intake process 2 forms and 2 calls. 2 forms and 2 calls. We call the first form the exploration form. In the coaching world, a lot of people call this a discovery call. I like to say explore is call 1, expansion is call 2 because of the types of forms they are. So I don't necessarily tell someone, come get on an explore form with me. I know that my explore form is for me to explore some of the surface level questions that could pre-qualify them or disqualify them from me. Yes, you may believe or want to be inclusive in who you serve, that's fine. But, and I say but, if you're working with ayahuasca and they're on antipsychotics, then they would be excluded. So you would want to know that. And when you reach a point of higher referrals, when you get these systems in place and create more safety, you get more clients. And when you get more clients, you have to have a more solid container to hold them in, a masculine structure to organize them. Otherwise, you will end up dropping the ball. You will end up forgetting someone the next time you're trying to book a retreat because you didn't keep a record of who you've worked with so far. So you're actually, if you're trying to build a business, but you're not organizing it and caring, it's like you already have these children, these inner children that you've been caring for, that you have actually abandoned because you forgot about them, right? And so these processes help to organize your thoughts. So 2 forms, 2 calls. The first form we call the explore form. This is 10 questions. We use Calendly, just calendly.com. And the max you can do is 10 questions through Calendly. And I like to have qualifying questions. So when you ask yourself, what would you need to know about them? What might be in the way of them working with you? What might be outside of what you could support? Do they have medical conditions, contraindications? And if you're seeking out a coach, facilitator, or shaman, if you're going down to the jungle, they don't usually do calls. They might do a form just medically. For a lot of you, that might be fine. But if you have complex PTSD, if you have health conditions, if you have mold toxicities, if mold, too much mold, autoimmune conditions, then having someone that's doing an intake form that's just asking medications, to me, is not comprehensive enough. At the end of the day, you'll trust yourself to be guided. I'm going to give you the information. You decide what to do with it. Listen with your whole body. So 2 forms, 2 calls. I call this full body listening. Really practice how you feel in the interaction. So you're going to sit, and this picture down at the bottom is called the logic ceiling. I'm not going to get into that today. That's like a 2-hour lesson in itself. We teach that at the live training. You have to come to the live training to really dive into the logic ceiling. It's the different layers of logic within a person. And so when someone is going through the intake process, you might notice at times that the facilitator says something. If you're the one seeking support and you get on the phone with someone, something just doesn't sit right. It's not that they're saying anything wrong. It's just something's not resonating with you, right? So that first initial call, what we call the explore form, is for us to explore the possibility of working together. If I'm a facilitator or a healer or a coach or a guide, it's for me to see, is this a potential for us to work together? Or maybe the person's not ready now and they just had some questions but they would like to later this fall, right? Something like that. That's what I like to do with the explore form, is to start to gather the information. Step 2, we get on the phone. So let's say we did the explore form and the explore call. After the explore call or during it, if we decide, cool, this seems like a great fit, then I'm going to send someone my expansion form. That's a much deeper, I'm going to very quickly show you just some of the questions for ours, because ours is 34 pages long. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to explain in sections. But in essence, if I assume now that we are good to go and work together, then I'm going to send the expansion form. Ours is about 34 pages, but as I mentioned before, we have a tremendous amount of trainings. Ta has 25 years in hospitals. We have a lot more to pull from. I worked in addiction. Like, we have a lot of capacity to go very deep to get as much information as possible with folks. And we were working with a lot of functional medicine doctors, chiropractors, biohackers, people that had a tremendous amount of awareness of their bodies as well. So we could go deeper, and a lot of chronic medical conditions where they had healed to a point. So you're going to see my questions. If you're a healer or coach or guide, this is not a benchmark to shoot for, okay? This is to consider for yourself how this would apply to your unique process. So on this second form, now they've filled out this long form, and that has to be completed before they get on the phone with me. Once they get on the phone with me, now I've got their very long intake form. Actually pause, because I'm going to bring that up in a second. So now I've done their exploration form, right? We're going to explore working together. Then they do my long intake form. Now we get on the phone for an hour. Now, a lot of coaches or shaman or guides will not do this. I have seen how effective it is to spend time on the front end to build rapport, create safety, get to know each other. And I find that it helps people have a lot more ease in the experience and feel a lot more held when they've had a thorough intake process. Okay? So we go through the intake process. I have this long form in front of me. My goal on our expansion form is not to sit and talk to you about every answer you gave me. Okay? Because 1, we never could. 2, it could be way too traumatizing and way too much for someone for you to go through their entire history on a phone call. What it does is it allows me to body map. So I get someone's pretty much entire medical history, cultural history. Are they first generation? Are they second? Were they refugees? Were they born here? Well, like, all of that stuff matters. And as I've gathered that, I'm actually creating a body map. I'm seeing where certain sensations, illnesses, disease, health crashes, where it happened, the ages, the chakra development, all of this we teach at our trainings. So it's just context. It's giving me a little roadmap for me to observe, not for me to dig into. I'm not going to say never, but if you get on the phone with a potential client or you get on with a potential shaman, coach, facilitator, the goal is not to dig for me. If the facilitator or guide comes in with the intention to dig, it becomes about them. So personally, I allow things to come to the surface that are ready to be seen, to be worked with, to be nurtured, to be loved, to be looked at. Not let's get to the core, deepest root so that we can rip it out as if the ripping out of the trauma or wounding is going to improve your life. I like to explain it like remodeling a house. If you're going into a psychedelic or plant medicine experience with a Western mindset of harder, faster, more now, what can actually happen is it's too much too fast. And just like if you went and took a sledgehammer to a load bearing wall, your life can cave in on you. And so it doesn't mean you can't go after some of these deeper, older woundings, parent things, family things are very common. It's that you would want a support system in place before you do. If you have kids that depend on you financially, if you're running a business or a company. So it's just like if you wanted to do an open concept of a house, how do you put support beams in place to open it up? The same in your internal infrastructure or internal architecture. We want to first get support structures in place before we go towards some of your adaptations or walls that you've built. Busting down all the walls brings the roof down. And walls are also very functional to keep things out that we don't want in, right? We have walls in homes to keep out weather and wild animals and disease and whatever. So be mindful in busting through things. Be mindful that you just have to go do it all at once. When you rush healing quickly, too hard, you can just hit the brick wall faster, which I guess in some ways you'll start the healing faster because you hit rock bottom faster, but I'll tell you it's a very painful way to do it. And unless you've got a lot of financial resources and the time and the space, most people do not have the ability to process that way. So by having this intake process on the facilitator side as a guide or even as a coach, I use it in coaching too, I'm able to map how someone views and what their beliefs are, which can help me mitigate their expectations going into the experience, illuminate the expectations. Yes? So, my 5 points to crafting the interview, this deeper expansion call that comes with the form, I like to do a reintroduction. So, we get back on the phone call, I say, hey, so great to connect with you again. I'm Cole. I'm going to be running the retreat. And then a declaration of safety. What is your safety and your confidentiality? I like to remind people this call will not be shared with anyone. Your privacy and your safety is my number one priority. So if at any point you need to pause, pull back, take a break, you don't want to discuss anything any further, right? I'm getting to mutual consent here. If you've never studied the wheel of consent, it's a great thing to explore. If you're in our coaching program, you have the video in your portal. So, and then we're going to explore the client's intentions. So for me, an intention is what do you want to know? What do you want to do? Who do you want to be? Or what do you want to understand in this process? And if it's someone's first journey, they might say, or if it's you going for your first time and you're just curious or you're not sure, then your intention is to go to experience it, right? That's what I want to do. I want to go and experience or understand what might be here for me in this process. And then we like to go through the questionnaire. This is something to review before we get on the phone. Inclusivity and congruence, that's something that we discuss a lot about. I'm not going to get into that today. That's more of in our coaching program. That's a longer process. Direct questions in regard to the facilitation process. So you remember earlier that I talked about, sorry, I just switched screens here for a second. So you remember I talked about too much too soon, too much too fast in an integration process. Why am I on that screen? This is funny. Yay, technology. You can do too much too fast. So when I get on a call with someone, the goal, like I mentioned earlier, is not to go through the entire intake form with the person on the call. My intention is if we have one big aha or something comes to the surface, we don't continue from there. I don't keep digging into the form. You know what I mean? I can review that on my own. When you, as a coach or guide, or you're going to a coach or guide, if their intention is your transformation, if their intention is your breakthrough, then it's about their outcome for you. For me, it's not about you having a transformation. It's that you come to me for something you want to explore. And if I have it within my tools and techniques and methods and methodologies to help support what you want to explore, cool. I'm not here to help you have a breakthrough. I'm here to create an environment for you to explore realizations, thought processes, habits, behaviors, and to be a sounding board, to bring questions to help you consider. But if me, the coach, and I've experienced it before, where someone was having such a hard time or they're really grieving, and I really want them to have that love and that connection and that connection to God or a past loved one because they'd really like to connect to their mom or something like that. If my emotional attachment to their outcome becomes my driving force, then it's no longer about them. It's about me. And that brings other problems within these experiences when it's like sometimes the lesson is not having the experience or getting what you wanted. That's the thing to explore. And by knowing in the intake process that someone does have expectations and we can illuminate those expectations versus hide from them, don't leave expectation in the shadow. Bring the expectations to the light so we can say, okay, so I hear that you really are coming hoping to connect with a past loved one. So let's talk about that. So what would happen? I like to call it a what happens when. So what would happen if the morning after you come and have this experience with me and that doesn't happen? Because that's a possibility. And I like to walk someone through the what happens when of all of the possibilities that I know from my experience, I know because they're intake form or I've seen or I am imagining. That helps us to, if in the experience someone's not getting what they wanted, it helps them start to coach themselves. It helps them to, or you, if it's you going into an experience, to go, oh, right. So what is here for me if it wasn't that? What is here for me to explore, right? And so this is where expectations and anticipations, instead of trying to avoid and say, I'm not going to have expectations. No, you already have expectations, and that's okay. It's not bad to have expectations. When we recognize disappointment, we see the evidence of the expectations, and then we have the opportunity to look at that. That is where the growth comes from, not from the avoidance or putting the expectation in the shadow. Let's just bring it to the light. Let's bring our whole selves to be seen. And then from there, we can take action. We can make adjustments. We can decide what to do. So, went on a little bit of a tangent there. This is what I do here. So one thing I'm going to show you is our actual intake form. So there's something called jot form. This is actually a pretty old one. So I don't know if this is our most current one. I just popped into our jot form to grab it. If you are a coach, facilitator, plant medicine carrier, guide, whatever, I highly recommend using encrypted forms because you're going to help to secure people's personal information, especially if you're gathering more personal information. And there's websites like Jotform where you can do encrypted forms. So just know that for us, we worked with non-disclosure agreements. We had clients where nothing could get out about them. And that was very important. That's what an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, is. And so we had encrypted forms as well, just for an added layer of safety. So just something to consider. And then here, so we have obvious things like full name, but we also have things like, what would you prefer us to call you? Because I want to refer to someone to what resonates the most for them. How do you feel about your birth name? How do you know us? How'd you get here? What event are you attending? How'd you hear about us? These are obvious things. Emergency contact. Now, you're going to see questions in our form like, what's your dominant hand? What's your pronouns? Is there anything about your sex assigned at birth we need to know about? Gender identity, your human design. When you make decisions, what matters? This helps us see, I can start seeing signs of neurodivergence, how people process, if they are very sensitive to smoke, light, sound, right? It can help me have context to ask questions. If I know that I'm working, say, with a neurodivergent person that's very like on the autism spectrum, very sensitive to smells, then I might want to let the shaman say, or the curandera in Peru, ask them to go lighter on the smoke because they tend to use a lot of smoke in ceremony. So this helps me, again, create a supportive environment for safety. Not, I can't give someone safety in totality because I can't keep them safe from their own thoughts, their past, but I can create an environment that's as supportive as I could imagine. Then we get into things like colors. We get into what country were you born in, race, ethnicity, their current experience with racial tension, if they have any distress around different people of any race, current political situations, travel. And I'm only going to touch on a few of these because, like I said, ours is really long. And so some of these, if you have no idea why we would ask it, you can ask us or come to a training where we talk about it in more detail. We have our reasons. How would you describe your daily stress? Where does most of your stress come from? What are the 3 most challenging issues in your life right now? When it comes to secrets, how do you feel? When what describes your ability to to concentrate and focus? What languages do you speak? Are there any languages? Are there fantastic? So you can see how long it's been since I've even looked at it, that cause you emotional or physical response. So here's one thing to consider. Let's say I'm working with someone who was born in Mexico. They grew up speaking Spanish, but in a household that was, say that it was very aggressive, or their grandmother was very physical with them. Their body, when they hear Spanish, has a feeling of being in trouble because when they went to school, it was English. When they talked to their friends, it was English. But at home with their grandmother, it was angry and a bit violent. They may have parts in their body, say during my ceremony where Spanish is spoken. If I see someone just looking very uncomfortable, I have a little context is all. I'm still not going to go rescue them or go try to save them, but these kinds of things help me to consider as someone is entering into my space. On the flip side of this, they could feel very soothed by Spanish. So I might play a song on the playlist that is in Spanish versus the English version to include their culture, to include their childhood nostalgia or love, right? I've done that with Vietnamese, Spanish, added different medicine songs from other languages that represent the people in the room. For me, inclusivity is that, to consider their relationship, and maybe not always positive, but if I want to be inclusive, including their language, including their childhood, can be really powerful. Current relationship status, a lot of these primary love languages, if I know someone knows this about themselves, that they're a quality time person. So at the journey, if it's at the end of the journey or as a coach, I might know to, if they're calling me, to get on the phone with them versus text. If there are words of affirmation, then that just gives me some more context to be supportive of them. Or I can ask, I see here on the form, words of affirmation is a thing. Tell me more about that. How could I support you through this process with words of affirmation? What would that look like? It's like I'm able to help people clarify like their user manual, who they are, and then they communicate their needs so that I can, quote unquote, win in creating the most supportive environment possible. When it comes to eye contact, this is important to know too. Eye contact can be very intimidating and too much for people, whether because of trauma or culture. Example, if you go down to Peru, it's not common practice to make eye contact. And in fact, can be too much or can be an invitation for intimacy with men in particular and female-bodied people, because culturally, to make eye contact is a deeper connection and an invitation. And so as a gringa going down to Peru, walking through the streets, and I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and smiley, right? Don't be surprised if you get followed and have people follow you around. You are open in a different way than they're used to. On the flip side, someone that has had trauma, or say they have a very masculine body, eye contact could be a sign of aggression or combative, right? So it's like making eye contact, like, who are you looking at? Fix your face, right? Things like that with eye contact. And so if I know that someone's not comfortable to make eye contact, then I don't, it just lets me be aware that whether it's from neurodivergence, trauma, circumstances, it helps me know that if they're processing something, they are really uncomfortable to make eye contact. It's a nice thing to know. Again, you don't need to ask any of these questions. The guide or facilitator you're going to probably won't. You get to decide what things are important to you so that you can go empowered in a sovereign space, bring that to your coach or guide or facilitator, and even just offer some of this information. It's about you deciding what places and spaces are safe for you first. You decide what feels correct. And it's not about there being a right answer from the guide or coach. It's really about how do you feel about the answers you get? How do you feel about the what you hear in return or what you feel in your body? Does what they say make you contract away? Why do you think that is? Yeah. Do you have a religious or spiritual practice? Here's a consideration. Let's say you grew up Mormon in Utah, like I did, going into a very, we'll say, shamanic or mystical space at first that has Icaros and smoke and ayahuasca, and maybe it's just a heavy, or I would say heavy as far as the pores, heavy as far as much as they give you. And there's darkness and that. My context through my religion before could translate dark energy as evil versus dark merely being dark, not of the devil, not of a bad thing, right? And so if someone has a very strong Christian background, it's going to come into the conversation because now I help a lot of people find the right space for them, right? That's what these classes are for, to help educate so that you can make decisions for you. But when you put someone so far into a context they've never been in, it can be too much too fast. So the music, the Icaros, the smoke, all these things can be too much for their physical body. And as I showed in that image of what we teach, the logic ceiling, the different layers of logic, if someone gets too much, let's say they're open in the experience, but then all of the sudden they see someone else like having an exorcism, they completely shut down into a primal instinctual intelligence. And now they can't think clearly. And they're afraid and they want to run and all of those kinds of things. By having a solid intake, I know what the possibilities are based off of their childhood experiences where they were raised, because we are binary trained. So they're either going to open with curiosity to the experience, or they're going to collapse down in, it'll be too much. So then as a guide, I might tell them, if they still decide to sit, I can give them more context of what to anticipate if I see that they're a very Christian background. Even if they think it's not going to be a problem, their body, their instinctual intelligence has already been trained from childhood, because really most of that you're exposed to by 8, 10 years old is in there in a deeper, unconscious, subconscious, primal, instinctual way. Just like if you got stung by a bee, saw a snake, the things you're afraid of, no matter how much you mind your way out of it, you can't if it catches you off guard. So if you're afraid of snakes and you turn and there's suddenly one right there, you are still probably going to react because it's a deeper unconscious programming. And instead of us telling someone, well, whatever comes up is what it's meant to be, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't jive for me. For you, rock on. Like if that works for you. I have unfortunately had so many times that people of power or people that I trusted told me, just trust me. And that led to detrimental consequences and once even a coma. I am unable to come without having questions. I trust people that can field my questions. That doesn't mean I need it my way, but I need someone who can communicate to help me feel safe, so that I feel like they actually know what they're doing. Because there's a lot of people out here, folks, that are good at sharing, they're good at marketing, they're not great when it comes to integrating it. They're not great at holding space for you if the you know what really hits the fan. And for me to feel safe, I have to feel like they got me, that I could actually go where I need to go and they would have my back. That's what I needed. And I am grateful that I have had teachers mostly like that, facilitators mostly like that, where if I said, well, I want to know how much you're giving me. And they'd go, well, why? Why is that important to you? Well, because this and this happened and I ended up in a coma. And so then they're like, cool, that makes sense. Let me tell you why I don't prefer to tell people dosages right now. If you have a great experience, you're going to say it's because of the substance. If you have a terrible experience, you're going to say it was because I gave you too much or not enough. And so I don't prefer to share that with people because you could anchor that into the experience. But by someone explaining it to me, that makes sense. And I can go, yeah, okay, that does make sense. Would you be willing to tell me after? And the person's like, yes, I'd be happy. And they're like, I'll tell you now. I don't have any problem to tell you. I just want you to understand why I typically don't. But because that makes sense to me, I feel more likely to trust them deeper. And what that actually led to is that I went 2 years that I didn't ask dosages or anything with one of my facilitators because they had shown that they could handle my questions. They didn't need to know all the answers, but they could sit with my questions because they never felt questioned by me because they'd done their work. They didn't feel questioned by me on their skills because they did that work. They saw that, yes, it was a trauma response. Yes, it was an adaptation and a fear. But instead of telling me or bypassing my emotions and saying, yeah, but that's why, they actually said, that makes sense. And they would invite me in. Yep. So that's why all these are important for me, why we do these live trainings. If you haven't been to a 3-day, I really recommend it, whether you're a coach, a medicine carrier, or someone seeking it. Then we talk about medical history. We also, and like I said, I can't cover all this. You look at the time already, right? So the reason these things matter to us, beyond just contraindications, is it just gives me context. A lot of this stuff here is actually more about the ACEs test, scars, sexuality, sensuality, things that a lot of people have trauma or bullying or adaptations. And if you're seeing me scroll through all of this, like, what? Whoa, all these questions. And you might even be one of those coaches or guides that's like, I can't ask these questions. It could create overwhelm. And yes, that's true. This is why when I tell you, don't look at our form as an example of something to strive to. We ask the questions that we ask for a reason, and we were working with people who were further along on their healing journeys, who were already out of the traumatic circumstances, who could speak about it, who had resourced themselves. And so they were coming to us more because they'd done the 60% of the work, but that 40% they couldn't figure out, their doctors couldn't figure out. So we had to go deeper. But this is not the goal. This is not the intention. We want to know if they've ever trained in martial arts or in the military, because if they had an experience in the medicine, in the expansive space, we want to know about that. We know how to position someone that's a veteran that was, I don't know if sharpshooter is the right word. They're actually programmed to need to know where all the doors are. And those are things we knew because of our experience. So that's why a lot of these this is so expansive. I wish every coach or guide would at least ask what we call the ACEs test. If you go to aces2high.com, that's ACES, ACES, TOHIGH, aces2high.com. I wish every coach at least had this and really read through and understood it. It's such a simple thing, and it's a generalization. It's not a rule, right? And I'm still scrolling through, as you can see. But it talks about adverse childhood experiences. It also talks about resiliency. Someone could have had a traumatic childhood. That does not mean that they are all dysregulated and walking around as traumatized adults. Their resiliency, the environment where they lived, all of those things matter in how someone related to their childhood experiences, how they grew from it. That's why in one household, one child could become a drug addict, another child could become a high-powered entrepreneur or CEO. They both had different ways of coping with traumatic circumstances and trauma. I'm not talking about car accidents and gunshots and all this. Those are traumatic. it's not just too much or violent. It can also be what you didn't get. It could also be not enough for too long of love, of nurturing, of support, of money, of all these. It was too little for too long, also. And a lot of times when people come into these spaces, they are comparing their trauma. Oh, well, I don't have a good enough story. Oh, well, I didn't have trauma like they did, so I shouldn't feel the way that I feel. I grew up in an environment that was so deeply ingrained in you have to be grateful for what you have because I lived in Utah. It was very like white, middle class, all of that, where it's like you have nothing. Like basically, you have no right to feel any way other than grateful for what you have. And it's not that I didn't believe that, but what also happened is then I would deny any feelings I did have. I was held at gunpoint. I was violently sexually assaulted, is a much calmer way to say it. I did have very traumatic circumstances, but because of my conditioning, I wouldn't even allow it to even be there. It was just like, nope, you don't have the right to feel any of those things. When in fact, a lot of the things that I experienced have been exponentially, we'll say more as far as like quantity than most of the people I've held space for in my life, whether as a coach, a guide, a personal trainer, like in every field. And so the second you start to compare your trauma, the second you look at someone's intake form and you think that just because there's a gunshot here or a violent sexual assault here and you don't see those things here, that they don't have trauma or that they'll be fine, you are miscalculating, right? You have expectations based on data. We like to have more data, not because data rules, but because context is king. That truth is relative to the person and their lived experience. And by me understanding more of that, I can have greater compassion. I can have greater understanding. And more times that I could count when someone appeared fine and maybe just control issues, little type A, that's not happenstance. That's consequence, cone sequence, usually from childhood experiences where either the father gave significance and love for high achievement or emotionally withdrew if they did not achieve. And what that created was autoimmune conditions, health crashes, usually, or with who we worked with, often between 38 and 48. It mattered less if the parent was physically abusive. There was something in the clients we worked with that if they were physically abused, but they knew they were loved, they saw that time heals wounds. A broken bone heals in time, but they knew they were loved, so their resiliency was higher. Versus someone maybe that was never touched or even spanked, but they were withdrawn from when they didn't perform right. It was a deeper, like mind game, but then they didn't know how to work with it. They didn't learn resiliency. There was no evidence when they needed support, so they didn't get it. Where when you have violent crimes against you, you can usually find resources or support or help. When it's more mental mind game things, there's no evidence. And if you're controlling and in like type A, then you have your stuff together on a societal level. So nobody feels bad for you. No one's coming to rescue you, right? And so all of this to say, and I'm going to bring up this kind of like final infographic that we have. And this is the one that if you want it, let me know and I'll make it available, of really what the 4 ins process is. And today we specifically talked about, and this might be a little hard to read on here, so we'll see. But in essence, we have this infographic on the intake process. It's a very simplified, just like nice, quick thing to have or to forward to a friend, where the intake process is about choosing the right coach or facilitator, right? And so it's all in the why. Your goals and motivations are unique. And in a good intake session, and I say good because it's supportive of you, it stirs things to the surface. It doesn't dig for them. It allows them to be nurtured up versus an aggressive digging. And so finding a coach or a guide who can help you clarify your why, what's driving you behind your quest for transformation or change, can help you have clarity, look at where the expectations lie, look at where the anticipations lie, and really be a supportive container to grow in. And then we always say communication is key in this process. Your comfort is important, and it can lead to a more open and candid conversation for you to express yourself without the same level of fear or anxiety because your questions are answered. How often in your life have you been silenced or told that your voice doesn't matter or quiet? The adults are talking. So if you take that training, that conditioning you have into psychedelics, into coaching, into transformation work, then you're still giving your power away to the shaman or guide. And if they won't receive your voice, your thoughts, your perspective, is that a container that you want to be in? Again, not a right or wrong thing. What do you want? What process are you in? What will be the most supportive? And then building rapport from the coach side, from the participant side. It's easier. If it feels easier to talk to them, if it feels more supportive, how likely do you think it's going to be that you're going to be able to access some of those more vulnerable parts because you feel safe with this person? You're going to explore different dynamics and people at different times. Some coaches can trigger you into change. Some can inspire you into change. What do you want? Maybe you want a more aggressive person right now that's going to give you higher dose and bust through and really push. It's not wrong. It's different. But if you've operated like that and those kinds of teachers most of your life, you have learned through pain. What would happen if you actually did it through pleasure, through acceptance? I've had incredible teachers in both sides, right? It's like a dominant energy versus a submissive energy. There's not a right or wrong. Can you trust yourself to be guided by this person or not? So for us to have to really have safety, that comes from having this rapport. And in a world like today, where there is a lot of complex traumas and childhood situations, and you're never going to be fully trauma informed for everyone. You cannot be inclusive of everyone. If you have an intake form that doesn't ask someone's gender identity for them to fill it in, you've already excluded people. If you have forms that talk about mark your sex, where it's just male, female, prefer not to say, you have excluded people already. And instead of trying to pretend that you could hold space for everyone, or you would want to, or that it would be safe, because you wouldn't want certain demographics of people to journey together because their physical bodies would not feel safe together, right? So by you really understanding what environment would be safe for me right now and the process that I'm in, if I had violent sexual assaults, maybe a male-bodied facilitator isn't the great step right now. Maybe having a woman's group or a survivor's group or people that have been through it would feel safer because I'd feel seen and understood. Cool. So your safety, mental, emotional, informational, and I don't say should often, and even here, just sometimes it's so much work to work around words that it's not even worth it. But your safety should be their priority. For me, if you're going to crack someone open, then taking responsibility for that person is really, it's got to be a priority. Otherwise, what are you doing? Ensure they emphasize confidentiality and create a secure space for you to share your experience of vulnerability, and listen to your heart, y'all. Really listen with your heart, listen with your body. Truth is, until you understand the difference between instinct and intuition, another thing we teach at the live training, because it's an important distinction between instinct and intuition. Instincts come from what's happened and things your body is meant to keep you alive. Intuition, you have to have space for. You have to be out of danger to even feel an experience. And so that's another thing we teach at the training. Come learn it. If you want that infographic I just shared here, just put down below, just put graphic, or just put, give it to me. But just make sure I know what you're talking about. In the comments, I might not see it. And it's just like a nice, simple little infographic to remind you on the intake process. So remember, I like 2 forms and 2 calls, because if we're going to do this deep, intimate work, I want to know more about you. If we're going to do this deep, intimate work, I want to know more about you. If you're my client, I want to know more about you if you're going to coach me. Because for me to truly open up, I have to know what I'm stepping into. For me to truly open up because of things that have happened in my life, I need more context. And if you're not willing to give it to me, you're not my person. You're not my coach. You're also not my client. Someone that says, I can't answer these questions, tells me everything I need to know, then I'm going to most likely refer them to a therapist or something else, because I'm here to coach. I'm not here to dig into your traumas. I'm here to understand where you've been, see where you are so that we can get you where you want to go. But I do need context. I do need, for me to do my job well, that's the information I need. If you're unable to provide it, that does tell me what I need to know. And then I always have referrals and recommendations. I'll say, you know what, it could be really beneficial to go work with this somatic experiencing practitioner. If you haven't sought out a therapist, here's one I know in your area. My goal when someone gets on the phone with me is to help them with their next step, to either get clarity in working with me or to help them know what direction they could move in. You've already been a huge gift to someone when you do that. So, y'all, in this moment, as you're processing everything I talked about so far, let me know what's your takeaway for today. And maybe you do a comment, maybe you don't. But if you just run through your mind right now, what's something that you either valued or something that you believed or something that's new that you're just like, oh, I never thought about it that way? Let me know. Just leave it in the comments. Again, that helps me really see what resonates, what kind of things are valuable to you. This is why we shifted out of facilitating and into education. We saw a lot of people out here facilitating without much experience, and I'm not here to hold the gates. I don't know what God, source, spirit told them. I can't make that decision for someone else. And that's the only thing I can do, or the only thing I choose to do. Correction. What I choose to do is educate, help you know how to raise the bar of the standards of what you want from the containers you sit in. And so that allows you to make an informed decision. Because truthfully, I've known some facilitators that fresh out of a journey started supporting people, but they knew exactly who they were meant to support. And it was friends and family they had deep rapport with, and they had incredible results. It's when you start working with people you don't really know. It starts with expectations and all these things when you don't really know yourself. So this is the opportunity to share, invite people to the group. The more educated we get, the more people know how to find a safe space that will force facilitators to elevate what they provide, to do some more deeper work. When the audience, when the clients, when the public demands different, it will have to be done differently. And so, again, this isn't to villainize. I don't believe in deciding who should or shouldn't serve. I can educate, help you make informed decisions so that you can stay safe, connected, and fulfilled. So may this moment, this time, this day sink in what you need right now so that when you start seeking out containers of growth, whether it's a coach, whether it's a doctor, like, let's be honest, if you do an intake on yourself and go to a doctor, I can tell a doctor more information than they could do trying to like discover with me, right? So it's like taking radical self-responsibility that this is my life, this is my container. And a lot of why I got to where I did in trauma was because I kept giving my power away to something else or someone else. And by having education, by holding your boundaries, by learning the difference between your instinct and your intuition, you're going to find the places and spaces that are more supportive of you so that even when you do that harder work, you face some of those more tender parts, you can start to do it in a way of more ease and pleasure, even in the hardest days. So invite someone to this, share this with someone. These do end up going up on YouTube after, so you'll be able to share it that way. It stays in the group for 24 hours, right? This is where we can interact and say hi. And I see you, Michaela and Shara, Marcella. Oh, Marcella, my heart. Marcella's known me a long time. Marcella's seen me grow all sorts of lots and things. So we got Top, Paul Mark. Oh, thank you, Paul Mark. Celebrate you too, boo. We got Andrea. We got Shetty. We got Issa, Ariel. So good, y'all. Vera, she's still here. Sabira. Rocking it out in South Africa right now. Summer, dawn, love it, y'all. Awesome. So, y'all, I know that these things are helpful. When you tell us, it makes it a lot easier for me to keep doing the work, just because when people comment, it's great. And again, our intention here is to really continue to educate, to really help you give context so that you can explain to family and friends why things work or how it's beneficial, so that you can go into your political leaders, go into some of these cases and get laws changed. But to just decriminalize and legalize is not it, fam. If we don't have systems and structures, a lot of people will get harmed. We're already seeing it increase in ketamine. Pause. Sometimes I have to mind what things I share. We must have systems in place to help support people if they're going to do this transformational work. And it's not just integrating psychedelics, it's integrating life. This is our opportunity to do that. As the Condor Approach grows, I'm seeing it like chicken soup for the soul. It's like there's going to be the Condor Approach for teens, the Condor Approach for psychedelics, the Condor Approach for marriage, the Condor Approach for divorce. This is an integration system, a methodology of integration, of intake, intention, in space, integration, because we haven't learned how to integrate. We haven't learned, what do I do after I have a baby and the old version of me dies? That's an ego death, like in psychedelics. But we have not actually learned how to integrate life, how to not avoid our disappointments or our expectations, but invite them in, right? And so this is a great place to step into for 2024. And if you want to help us grow this, if you're like, hey, I'd love to teach this, I just need help doing it. I'm doing as much as I can do. And there's so many incredible coaches we have access to that let's do this, fam. Thank you all so much. As per usual, I went over. Such is life. I'm also here to just show up for what's alive, what's true, what's real. Have a beautiful, incredible rest of your Monday. And until next Monday, my name is Cole Whitty. We'll be back next Monday for a live masterclass inside the Facebook group. After that, the video gets put onto YouTube, so it's shareable. If you share it, we change the conversations with the people around us. And then from there, the facilitators that are not showing up authentically, that are not having integrity, will be weeded out, or they will have to elevate their abilities, or they'll weed themselves out. So until next time, be easy, be free. Peace.
The Condor Approach is a methodology. This is not a law space, not a religion, not a cult. This is not a space of indoctrination. It is a methodology. And we use the methodology of the Condor Approach to integrate things in our lives. It's a tool belt. You have all of these tools that you use on a day-to-day basis, and we move through a psychedelic-informed lens because it works. And there are a lot of people that are leaning into utilizing psychedelics, and they're not integrating with intention. Integration is something that's not optional, but it's something that's ongoing all the time. And if we don't do it with intention, we get what we get. So the question is, can you coach yourself, and can you be coached by somebody else? From our vantage point at the Condor Approach, coaching is eliciting greatness from another person. It is supporting another person, bringing out the greatness in them. And so if you can coach somebody else, can you coach yourself? Bring the greatness out of you. Be coachable and have fun. If you fall out of having fun, things can get really challenging. So bring yourself back to fun at every instance that you possibly can, y'all.